r/NoSleep. Posted by u/lifeisstrangemetoo. My daughter has a disturbing and deadly talent. 6 words. So innocent, and yet, they had ruined everything. Daddy, look what I can do. I had turned, smiling, to see my daughter's newest magic trick. I stopped smiling when I saw it. My heart stopped, my blood ran cold, a disturbing reminder of things past. I grabbed her by the shoulders, a little too hard. Made her promise to never tell another soul about what she could do. I made her swear so many times. She was crying by the end. Her face was ugly and contorted, her nose dripping snot. But she promised. I always knew that would not be the end of it. I knew what I had to do. Slip some sleeping pills into her drink, and cover her face with a pillow, like I had done with her mom. But I could not bring myself to do it. I loved her far too much, even more than I had loved my wife. And as she grew older, looking more like her mother every day, I knew it was only a matter of time. I still remember the night my wife told me, the night of our 5th anniversary. She had bought my favorite scotch, cooked us both some thick steaks, and sat me down at the dining room table. Our baby son was sleeping soundly in his room. I have something important to tell you, she said. Her tone sent chills trickling down my spine. I'm pregnant, she said flatly. My breath caught in my throat. I smiled. She did not. I don't understand, I said, breathlessly. Isn't this good news? My wife's lips pursed into a thin white line. It's a girl, she said. I can feel it. I waited for her to explain why she was upset, but instead, she started talking nonsense. The girls in my family. She trailed off. We all have a special ability. I shook my head. Okay? I said, my mind a question mark. And what is that? My wife frowned. It's better if I show you. She lifted the steak knife from beside her plate. Before I could stop her, she violently slashed open her wrist. I sent my chair clattering to the floor behind me as I lunged for my wife. I grabbed her arm so hard. But what I saw did not make any sense. Her arm was slashed down to the bone, but the blood did not flow out. It won't come out unless I let it, said my wife. It was then the blood began to flow. Down her arm, then up, into a shape. It detached and rose up, forming itself into a face, floating in midair. My wife's face. Then spiraling back down, like a funnel, into her open arm. The flesh knitted itself back together. That night, my dinner went untouched. What happened next was all my fault. But, in my defense, I felt my trust had been betrayed. I did not know where to turn. Weak and weary, I turned to the arms of another woman. Of course these things always come out. When I came home that day, my wife was sitting in one of the wooden dining room chairs. She had moved it to the middle of the living room, so that she was facing the door when I came in. Our baby daughter was snoring gently in her room. I could hear our son as he watched cartoons in his own. As I looked into my wife's eyes, I knew that she already knew. She stood up. My blood ran cold. Then I realized that it wasn't just a chill, my blood was actually getting colder. My wife walked slowly towards me. I can freeze you from the inside, she said. Burst all the blood vessels in your body. I can boil you alive. I can make you bleed from your eyes, your ears, and every pore. And next time, I will. My heart stopped, and I collapsed unconscious to the floor. By the time that I awoke, my wife had already found my lover, and done the last one she had threatened me with to her. After that we always fought, and my wife began to lose it. My mother died from a cerebral hemorrhage. My sister died from a stomach bleed. She never admitted it, but I knew that it was her. I had no choice, I had to kill her. And now, I wondered if I should have killed my daughter, too. My heart throbbed with guilt as I thought back to the first time she had shown me her magic trick, all those many years ago. I knew I could have stopped this all with a pillow and some pills, just as I had done with my wife. She said it was an accident. And maybe it was. But as I stared down at the body of my son, covered in blood that had exploded from every pore, I didn't really care. The next story of this video. Posted by u/lifeisstrangemetoo. The dead lurk beneath the waters. I used to wander the old dirt trails by the lake in the early morning hours, when the first rays of light spread across the horizon in a golden line, breathing in the scent of the pines and the dew-dampened grass that floated to my nostrils on the salt-soaked wind. One by one my worries would drift away, until my mind was empty except for the lapping of water and the sweep of a gentle breeze across my face. It was in one of these meditative states that I met the monster of the lake. My eyes were closed as I took in the quiet noises of the early morning, the insects and the occasional bird calling in the distance. I heard a bubbling noise from the water beside me, and I opened my eyes to see a hideous creature bobbing up and down among the lily pads. His skin was rough and green like a frog's, and his eyes were huge, glassy orbs that seemed to look right through me. When those eyes were fixed upon me, I found that I could not move. "I see you have come to seek peace by the lake," said the monster. His voice was deep and croaked like a frog's. "Yes," I replied. "So I have. And I also see you are running from something," he continued. I felt an uncomfortable squirm in my stomach. "How can you see something like that?" I asked. The monster gave a throaty chuckle. "It's easy to see when you're really looking," he said. "So tell me, human, what are you running from?" I looked at the sky and watched a feathery cloud drift eastward on the wind. "I'm running from the noise," I said. "From the neon lights and the music, and the endless conversations of words that mean nothing." I paused for a moment before I continued. "Sometimes I wish I could go back to before, when the city was just a village, and words actually meant something." The monster chuckled again. "A long time ago," he began, "before the neon lights and the music, when the city was just a small fishing village, there were still conversations full of words that meant nothing. Only sometimes, if you knew where to look, could you find something worth listening to." "So it's always been this way, then," I said. "I'm afraid so," the monster replied. I stared past the monster at the vast expanse of gently rippling steel-gray waters. "Do you know what I came here to do?" I asked. Though somehow, I already knew the answer. "You came to seek peace in the lake," he replied. "Quiet dark beneath the still waters of death." "Yes," I replied. My stomach squirmed with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Are you going to stop me?" I asked. "I'm going to guide you," he replied. "Come beneath the waters with me." I took a deep breath and steeled myself, and then I waded into the cold waters of the lake. As I walked towards the monster, the water first reached my ankles, then my knees, my waist and then my neck. By the time I had reached where he was floating, the water was above my head. The monster sank below the surface of the lake and took my hand, pulling me deep into the lake. As we went deeper, the water grew darker, and soon the weak sunlight of the early morning could no longer penetrate the murky black depths. The monster led me to the bottom, to a bed of seaweed and algae. "You can rest here," he said, bubbles drifting out of his mouth as he spoke, far away from the city noise. As I stared at the bed of seaweed and algae swaying gently under the water, I suddenly realized I could no longer breathe. My lungs burned for oxygen, and my brain screamed at me to get to the surface. I kicked off and began to swim upward with all my might. I felt a hand close around my ankle, and suddenly I was being pulled back down to the bottom. I looked down to see a rotted hand clasped around my ankle, yellowed ancient bones poking through rotted flesh as it held at me in its death grip. As I sank lower and lower, I saw other dead faces, looming hollow and white through the darkness, strands of pale gray hair drifting eerily through the water. "Your place is here," they chanted. "Beneath the rippling black waters of silence." I kicked out hard at the one who held my ankle, my foot taking with it a piece of fragile, waterlogged flesh as it collided with its skull, and I felt its grip relax. I kicked off again and propelled myself towards the surface as fast as I could. Dead faces whirled around me, looming in and out of view. The dead screeched as I shot towards the surface, lunging at me and digging long fingernails deep into my flesh, and their chase became more frantic. I was able to distance myself from the crowd, but my muscles grew clumsy and heavy. Purple stars danced in my vision. I was not going to make it to the surface. But just when I was about to give up, I saw a faint light, glimmering gray through the water above me. I forced my burning, heavy limbs to move. I forced my oxygen-starved brain to focus on only one thought: get to the light. Slowly, the light grew brighter, and soon it was no longer gray but gold. I had almost returned to the surface, towards fresh air and sunshine. I burst through the surface of the water and sucked in the fresh lake-scented air. The sunlight of the early morning dazzled in my eyes as I took in each heady lungful. Finally, my breathing began to steady. I scanned the flat gray waters of the lake, looking for the shore. But it was nowhere to be seen. Before I could decide which direction to go, the monster surfaced a few feet from me. I raised my fist to strike him, but as he fixed his glassy black eyes on me, I realized I could no longer move. "Come with me," he said. The monster grabbed my arm and began to swim along the lake's surface, away from the horizon. Before long, the shore came into view, and the monster deposited me on the edge of the lake, next to one of the old dirt trails. I lay flat on my back and regarded him warily as he stared up at the sky. "You tried to kill me," I said. "Yes," said the monster. "I did. And you chose to fight back." He once again fixed me with his glassy black stare. "There's a quiet loneliness in the scent of the early morning air," he said. "But there is more in a bed of seaweed and algae beneath the silent black waters of the lake." We locked eyes for a long moment, the water lapping at the monster as he bobbed up and down among the lily pads. Then without a word further he sank beneath the surface, and the black waters closed over his head. I never saw him again. I sat for a while and watched the sun creep further and further up into the sky. I breathed in the scent of the pine trees and the dew-dampened grass, and slowly, I tried to will myself to forget the horror that I had just witnessed. It's been many years since I last visited the lake. I know that time has a way of distorting our memories, and in the years since I met the monster, I've often tried to convince myself that what I saw was just a fabrication of an oxygen-starved brain. But there is one thing that prevents me from deceiving myself wholesale. The scars that the dead gave me that day have never faded, and when my thoughts turn to darkness and death, the scars burns red and painful like fire under my skin until I push the dark clouds from my mind. And when the clouds part, I can close my eyes and see the lake as I saw it that day, mirror gray waters reflecting the first golden light to spread across the horizon. I hear the insects and the birds, smell the trees, damp earth and grass, feel the cool kiss of wind across my face. And I am at peace.